I'd like to introduce Bree McNamee and Ken Stone, who will be our speakers for today. Bree is the Director of Government Relations and Advocacy at the New York Library Association. Prior to becoming a lobbyist in New York State and Washington, D.C., Brianna worked with representatives in the state legislature. With previous roles spanning both private and public sector, she has a unique perspective on all things capital. Ken Stone has been heavily involved in governmental finance for over 40 years, beginning as an evaluator for the U.S. General Accounting Office, now known as the U.S. Government Accountability Office, GAO, and moving on to responsible positions in city and county governments. He is currently Deputy Director, Chief Financial Officer of the Buffalo and Erie County Public Library System, which is a regional library system serving the citizens of Erie County, New York, through 37 library facilities and 2 high-tech mobile library vehicles covering a territory of 1,043 square miles. If you've ever been to Nyland Advocacy Day, you probably recognize both of them. And we're very happy to have them here today. Welcome. You may get started.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much for having us. I'll kick it off and let me believe we're sharing my screen. You should be able to see the agenda for today's meeting. This is a one-page PDF that has links to everything that we're going to be talking about today. So if you download it, it'll help you find your way through the process. I like to generate one-pagers that you know, it's easy. You don't have to flip through a whole big presentation to find the links you need. It's all there for you. So we're starting to cover that. And I wanted to begin by giving you an overview of the state budget, because it's important to understand the context in which we in the library world fit. You know, it's easy to focus on getting our daily jobs done and dealing with our individual budget pressures. But it's good to know what are the major influences at the state level, because it affects what kind of position they're in to either provide us a helpful year or a less than helpful year. And for many of you who've been around for a while, you know we've had both. So let me do that. The first site that we're going to, and I'm using PDF for this just because I could make some of the charts a little easier to see on the presentation. This New York State Open Budget site. They've been improving this over recent years. It's much better than it was when it started. And there's a section on charts that gives you an overview of how the budget's put together. So let's start there. First thing is, where does the state get its money? It gets its money from taxes, and everything else is only 17%. And where does it go in terms of functions? You can see that it's going to basically education and healthcare are the big kahunas. Local school aid is the biggest single slice, and that's K through 12 school aid, Medicaid, and all other local assistance, including roads and highways, municipal AIM, and the other major programs supporting local government. So it's really, when you look at what's actually the state is doing, it's about a third of their budget, including SUNY and the state college system. Elected officials, 3%, and debt and capital, 6%. And all of the rest of the state agencies are 16% of the budget. And your total is $122.6 billion. It's what they had in their adopted operating budget for fiscal year 2023. First thing I asked when I saw these charts is, gee, taxes. That tells me a lot, doesn't it? So you do have to dig a little bit to get a little further. In those pages, you can click on the financial plan detail, and it downloads a spreadsheet that looks like something that, let's say it has a whole lot of tabs on it. But the first tab has an index that tells you what to look for. And rather than spend that time, your valuable time doing that, I basically went to the tab for state operating funds, that matches up with that chart. And what you can see in terms of tax revenues, $98 billion in taxes. The biggest single one by far is the personal income tax. Next is consumption and use taxes. That's a fancy way to say, for the most part, the state's share of the sales tax. Wherever you are in New York State, your municipality, your county most frequently, although some cities levy a sales tax, but everybody collects the 4% state share of it that goes to New York State. In Erie County, it's 8.75% total. 4% goes to New York State, and the remaining 4.75 is shared between Erie County and its governmental entities, municipalities, cities, towns, villages, and school districts. That's a little more unusual. A lot of the counties do not share with school districts, Erie County does. And corporate business taxes, next biggest slice. Now, what happens when the economy is doing well, as it did after the rebound from COVID? Sales tax collections were way up. Personal income tax collections were up. But what's the first thing to happen when the economy slows down? If people have reduced hours of work, if people are laid off, there are fewer people working fewer hours, that almost immediately affects New York State's major revenue stream, the personal income tax, because much of that tax is collected through withholding. So they see the drop pretty quickly if you have a situation like that. And we had that situation when COVID happened. Our library shut down on March 16, 17. We were closed for a couple of months and started gradually reopening, opening doors in June. And in that time, a lot of people, particularly if you worked in the hospitality industry and restaurants, you had no hours. So the state saw two things happening right away. One is that their withholding dropped like a rock, their revenue, and sales taxes dropped like a rock. It took a while for people to figure, who still had paychecks, to figure out that maybe I need to upgrade my home office. And so there was a big drop in both of those major revenue streams. And you can see, 50, 60, $70 million of the state budget are those two sources. So that's the kind of thing you want to be aware of. And coming up, we're looking at a period with accelerated inflation higher than people expected to. The Federal Reserve is probably going to announce a large interest rate increase today, whether it's 0.75% or 1%. That's slowing the housing market. Eventually that will slow the economy, and it's going to affect those two major revenue streams for New York State. Okay. And where does the money go? Let's see. Most of the money is going, the largest chunk, school aid. The next largest chunk, Medicaid, Department of Health. Medicaid, healthcare. The two major sources for state expenditures. And you can see, even a lot of us focus locally on transportation, roads and bridges and so forth. It's only $4.6 billion out of that total budget. So much of the money is going to school, K through 12, higher education, so forth. So out of that school aid and higher education and all education, library aid is just under $100 million. Oh, so when you look in perspective, so library aid would be a 100, and it's not. It may not even be in the school aid. It may be in all other education. It's probably $100 million. So it's pretty small. So one of the things you'll find when you're trying to figure out what's going on with the state budget on libraries is, how do I find it? And we're going to get to that in a bit. This shows where the spending goes by function: education and arts, health, higher education, mental hygiene, and transportation only 4%. the elected official only 3%. So, even if occasionally people say the state needs to cut its own operations, well, you can. But if you did, it's not going to generate the kind of huge savings that one might think. This is by function and over time, multiple years. And this is by where it goes. And you can see when you lump all those aid together, the Medicaid, school aid, and so forth, it's going to local governments. So it's not like the state's keeping all this money and spending it directly. It's sending it down here to all of us. And then at the end of this handout, I've got more links to give you even more information about the state. So wanted to get through that. And if there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I don't know if Caitlin, you have any that have come up so far. Now I'm going to share. We're now going to switch over to Google. And the next thing is the state budget process and how does the state estimate where things are going. There are several sources. One of them is the Division of Budget, and they produce the state's multi-year financial plan, and they update it regularly. This schedules the plan for fiscal 23, started with the executive budget, which is the governor's proposed budget, that was released in January, and it's been updated through the first quarter. And if you click on this guy, you'll see that it's first quarterly update, and it's 179 plus pages, and you don't need to read all of that. You can get a good gist of what's going on by simply reading the financial plan overview. And that's like an executive summary, and they cover what are the major issues that they are seeing going on in the state and affecting the state's budget. Here we go. And this is what you want to read. So this is a couple, 3 pages, and it'll give you an idea where they think the economy is going. They are concerned about inflation. They are concerned about a recession that may impact their revenues. Not this year. This year's looking pretty good. But next year, the state's fiscal year starts on April 1st and goes through March 31st, as does the state retirement year. So it's good to find that and take a read. The other source that's independent of the administration is the New York State Comptroller. And they don't just audit, they monitor economic trends and conditions. They regularly report on performance of sales tax. And occasionally they produce economic profiles. So most recent, this one is on the Rockaways. So if you live in that area, if you want to read more about your economy, there you go. And you can basically scroll through that and go towards it. You can see that one of the things they do is a report on the state's enacted budget plan. And shortly after the state's budget is released in January, the comptroller issues an analysis of the executive budget financial plan and where they think there are areas of concern or issues or what have you. So it's, and again, you don't have to read the whole reports, but the state controller's reports generally do a good job providing an executive summary that will give you the gist of what's going on. So if you have that context, it's helpful in starting to work with the state budget. The next thing you want to do is time things. Because if you say that you think, gee, we have Governor Hochul now, she may be more amenable to library arguments than Governor Cuomo had been. Let's see if we can approach the governor and see if we can affect what they might recommend. Well, if you wait until late December to do that, you're not going to be terribly effective because their budget's pretty much put to bed by that point in time. They're doing final tweaks. So really you want to approach each level of government, if you're going to attempt to advocate to them, prior to their major decision points. I see Bree nodding. She knows this very well. Because you're wasting your time, and to some extent you're wasting their time if you start that lobbying effort too late, and they kind of go, why are you guys waiting this late? So it doesn't really help you if you don't time your advocacy, and that actually can hurt you because they figure you really don't understand what's going on. So that's important to note. So they are in the process of developing their budget for the fiscal year begins April 1, 2023. Right now, the agency and departments, they probably turned in or about to turn in their budget requests. So if you'd wanted to influence the state ed department, what are you gonna put in your budget proposal? It's probably too late for them right now. So you want to approach them earlier in the year, and then. In terms of influencing the governor's budget proposal, I think the most effective time, and Bree, feel free to chime in, is actually when the budget office is doing their review. And because for one thing, you may come up with an ask, and then the governor's staff may ask the budget division budget to, what's an analysis, what's the effects, what's the ramifications, and it increases your chance that you time that right. So, and then again, we all kind of know, if you've been around for a while and doing advocacy in the legislative process, that you don't want to wait too late in that process either to begin your advocacy. Certainly, you want to do it at a time when they're preparing their asks, and even before that, with your legislators, make sure you know them and they know you. The time to invite them for a tour of your library is not when they're hip deep in the budget process. It's the prior fall or summer when you're doing something cool, doing a great summer program. You're doing something that, or if they've provided some member aid or you've gotten a construction aid, invite them over to show it off. And you build that relationship, and that's really helpful when you get to budget time, because they realize that you're interested in working with them all year long, and not just when you're looking for money, along with a lot of other people. So, and then the other thing we'll talk about in a minute is timing things and when the legislative process begins. Let me go on to that. Division of Budget. This is their budget announcement. And if you go through that, this is now it has the enacted budget information. If you look at this in early to mid-January, once the governors announce their budget, you will see the executive budget, and it will be, they will do, among other things, put up the executive budget legislation. So if you click on that, what you see right now is everything, including the adopted, but this is the executive budget proposal as has been amended. In January, you're not going to see any of this stuff because it hasn't happened yet. But what you will see is the original executive budget legislation. And that's what you want to look for, because, timing is everything. You usually, you're not going to see these draft bills before the governor's speech. And the question is how quickly after. Usually it's within a day that they put it up on their site, sometimes late that night. And you notice it's, I'll leave and I may be working 6 or 7 o'clock at night. It's not up yet, but by the time I walk in the next morning, it is. There are 2 bills that library aid is typically in. Our operating bill, the basic aid, the $99 million, is in the aids to localities bill. And then library construction aid is in the capital projects bill. I'm going to click on this one. And I might have to do a share because the way they've loaded these, and this is a good tip to know. If you see these things in PDF format, download it, because it's a lot more capable of being searched if you're using the Adobe product, for example, rather than a web browser. And I do notice that Google occasionally likes to try and steal what files it opens, and Google wants to open the PDF, and that doesn't work really well. For some PDFs, the browsers don't always support everything. One of the things they may not support, for example, is if I try to search. Well, let me try it, see if it'll work. There you go. This is really tough. You bring up the bill and you search for library. And you're going to find, in this case, because the basic aid is for libraries, I could have searched on libraries, but then I wouldn't be able to find the construction aid because it's state aid for library construction. So I searched for library. And because the aid for public libraries section includes New York Public Library, library finds it right away. And you can see the governor proposed an increase. It was $94 million the prior year. So the governor did propose a $2 million increase, which is a big deal. Mr. Cuomo liked to cut it, and all of our efforts were to try and so that was a big deal. And if you want to know what public TV gets, there you go, and public radio. But this is our number. So if we go back on that, and then in the capital projects bill, and we'll search for library again. And oh, the Gould Library Rotunda staircase is being renovated, and it's $665,000. That's not what we want. More Gould Library. Library upgrades to a community college. Bronx Library. Okay, here we go, library construction. Now, yeah, you'll get to see some other things in there, but you're going to get to this pretty quickly by just clicking through that for library. And you will see the library construction aid program, as we all recall, the governor proposed $14 million. That was it. $20 million reduction from what the legislature had put back the year before. So we know that we have some work to do there. So there you go. Let's see. Then the next site you want to check is NYLA. Bree does a really nice job of keeping this up. And the tab you want to look at is for advocates. And right now it's the 22 information. But you've got a lot of, especially now if the budget's been enacted, you can see laws affecting libraries, but I'm focusing on budget today. Here's the state budget. And you've got it all here from soup to nuts. The grants, these are member grants for the state and assembly that were approved in June after the budget. Capital assistance grants, the final enacted budget information, the one house information from both the assembly and Senate. And I'm going to get into that in a second in more detail, but it's a nice sum and it's all here. Now, that's because the budget's done. When this is happening, it's not here yet because it hasn't happened yet. So, and I don't know, Bree, if you want to chime in as far as timing, is when's the best time to check NYLA's website for stuff?
I mean, certainly we all know when the executive budget, I try to do my best to let everybody know when it gets posted. I mean, we do know within a 5-day window when it is, because it's in statute. But as far as like checking back during budget season, I would say, I mean, certainly check, I would say at least, once a week, directly after the executive budget. And what I'll try to do is either through our news you can use or through our voice, let everybody know, give them a heads up of when we're expecting to see those one house budgets come out, and if I'm hearing any crickets or any news that I can share. So, but yeah, I would say this is the one-stop shop for everything, both budget and policy. So if all else fails, maybe put a reminder on your calendar once a month to check it out.
Yeah, it really is good because, and NYLA develops position papers. NYLA takes the position, what they're recommending, what they're advocating for. And Bree in particular has a good sense of what's going on there, and that affects what your ask should be and what's a realistic ask, because I know some folks want to just ask for the moon and here's what was legislatively approved, and And in some years, in a good year, that's good to do. In a year where you know that they're facing severe financial challenges, that doesn't go over as well. You know, your ask needs to be kind of coordinated with what the situation is, at least from my perspective. That's all that is my perspective. I've sat on both sides of the table. I'm chief CFO for the library system. But in Spokane, Washington, before I came here, I was the budget director. I was the guy who had to say, I don't think we can do this, Mr. Library Director, or here's what we can do. Work things out. So you kind of, I've had a feel for both sides of those things. So Bree mentioned the Assembly One House bills, and one of the things, and I think it's the Assembly that you have to check each year, because they changed the URL for their budget page. Usually they just put the new year in, but for simplicity's sake, just go to their homepage when the budget's released or about that time, and usually it will be prominently displayed. Even now, it still is. There's the New York State Assembly, the state budget. There we go. And this takes you to their state budget page. Notice that the URL says Assembly, State, New York, US 2022 budget. Chances are it'll be 2023 budget next year, and you can type in 3 and it'll work. If it doesn't, you just go to the homepage and find a new update. You know, but it's helpful, and it gives you basically an encapsulation of what's going on. And I'm going back in time because this goes all the way through enactment. But early in the budget year, and you can see on January 24th, they published their yellow book. And that's the Assembly staff's analysis of the budget that is proposed. And if I click on that, and it'll say, okay, let's click on the whole thing. And again, let's search for library. You got library materials for schools. But in this case, they're talking about the 2 million increase in aid for library operating to 96.1 million, and library construction was being cut 20 million by 14. So their staff know, and it's right on there. And if you search the Senate, you frequently find something similar. Some years you don't, you know, because again, the library's share of the state budget's pretty small. So you may or may not find it directly. But yeah, the Senate is a similar thing. This is their homepage late in the year. And early in the year during the budget, you'll probably see a link right up front prominently to find their budget page. But if you go down to the bottom of their site, it's been this way for a little while, there's a budget. Click on that, and it'll take you to their budget, which tracks back in time as well. And you can find more information about the Senate's perspective. The Senate has a blue book. They like colors, yellow and blue. I don't think they were always the same color, were they, Bree? I think they changed them.
No, I think yellow and blue has been around at least since I've started internally. So they've been that way for at least 15 years, but they may have been different colors before then.
Yeah, I've been around too long. So if you search, if we go and search their budget for library, there we go. And even nice little trend of what's going on. And they pointed out those two. So we knew early on that the changes to library aid were on their radar. That helps with advocacy. So then the other thing you can do from the state, let me go back to, here we go. Let me go back to the state budget office website. Division budget. And we searched their information. Let me go back to the, and that's their enacted. So let me go back to the legislature. Because one of the things you will find then is they release their budget proposal. And they will tell you what they're doing. This is the Assembly in this case. Although I should have looked up the Senate because you like that a little better. Assembly is the Assembly's basically they're supportive of libraries, but the ones that are not afraid of throwing big dollars out there and at least to take a position in recent years has been the Senate. And you can search that for library aid. The other thing you can do is do a legislative search. And there are two flavors of it. This one is the one that you can link off of the State Budget Office site. And one of the nice things it has is it's a simpler search. You can word search for bills. And I'm just going to search for budget. And here you go. There's a lot of budget related stuff. But if you scroll on down, you'll see here are Assembly bills, state operations budget, legislature and judiciary budget, aid to localities budget. Let's look up that one. And you get an entire history of the bill to that point in time. So if you look this up earlier in the year, you would see where it was after it was introduced, and you can see what has been developed as they went along. This was searching on the adopted. So if I want to go to the wait a minute. Yeah, there we go. Now let me go back into the Assembly search. It tells you what each of these budgets are, but I'm going to go over to the bill search for the Assembly, which gives you more information, more detail. So I'm going to go to here's aid to localities budget. Yeah, it's not working for me. Let me see what I've got here. Oh, wait. It shows you the history of when it was amended and changed. If they're going to change the bill title, they will put it in there for you. And go to the Assembly budget page. Here we go. Oh, this is the Senate. Yeah, I'll go back to Assembly. And here we go. This is the Assembly budget, and this is the their overall indication of what they think they're going to be proposing. Well, normally you would look that up on the legislative search at that point in time. Let me flip to save time for me fumbling around here. Oh, there we go. Oh, that's weird. I'm having a control issue here with the, there we go. There we go. Let me look at, don't want that one. Well, let's look at the capital project bill. Okay, this is the I basically taken excerpts from each budget bill. This is the capital project budget bill, which was started with what was introduced by the governor's office. And you can see the library construction aid was $14 million. In the assembly, this is 9004B. That's their one house bill, which was actually introduced in March. 3/13/2022, it was uploaded, and you can see the assembly put it back to $34 million. The Senate did the same on their one house bill, but they bumped it up to $45 million. And then this gives you the history listing of the bill as it progressed through, the cover page, and then this is the enacted budget bill that was approved by the Senate and Assembly on the 8th and signed by the governor on the 21st. And it restored the budget funding to $34 million. So you ended up with $34 million rather than the two items that had been requested, the Senate, not the Assembly versions. So you notice the Assembly version was the lowest of the two, and what they ended up with was the Assembly version. It's important to know, keep an eye on the one house bills because they will tell you kind of the range. You don't usually see an end result being higher than either of the houses because they're proposing things and then they have to be negotiated with the governor. So let's look at how the operating bill came out. There we go. Here's the Assembly. This is the governor's proposed budget bill, and that was 96 to 2%. The Assembly proposed raising it by $10 million. And you notice here, we could find this by searching the bill when it's announced. If you go onto their page, they will tell you the first single house bill is up. And if you go into legislative search, you'll be able to find it. It's usually the same bill number. And you can then pull it up and search for library to find it just like you did in the first one. And in this case, you'll see that when they did an ad, it's a separate line. And one wonders, why do they make it a separate line? Why don't they just add it into the total? And part of that is because the legislature can add, they don't cut necessarily. And New York State has a line item veto. So in theory, if the governor wasn't happy with it, they could veto this line, this $10 million, but not affect the 96. And they wouldn't because this was the proposed budget amount. So it segregates the two amounts. You can see what they're adding. In the case of the Senate, they wanted to add $27 million. So up to $123 million from in the library aid, which is kind of what the ultimate ask was at that time. So you're now going to have something between 123 million and 106. You think, oh, maybe it should be between that. Well, don't forget, both houses still have to negotiate with the governor. And so what you ended up with was neither. You ended up with 99 million, which is still not, still better than a poke in the face. But it's obviously less than the two houses, but it's more than the governor proposed by $3 million, $3.5 million. And you can see there's the net add, and this was what was approved in the enacted budget. So there we go. So let's see what else have we to cover. Are there any questions in the chat?
We had a couple questions. It looks
Sure.
like Bree took one of them. So thank you for that, Bree. There's some good information in the chat about timelines if you haven't looked at that. That Bree shared. But somebody had a question about one of the first charts that you showed us.
Mhm.
Wanting to know what personal service and non-personal service meant.
Oh, okay, okay. Payroll and benefits, most likely. Let me pull that hand up. Are you talking in this schedule?
I believe this was the schedule.
Yeah. So personnel service, salaries and wages, and may include fringe benefits. Non-personnel services are the other operating costs for operating the State Department. So you have to, you building operation, maintenance costs, supplies, motor pools, all of that fun stuff. Park ranger vehicles, you name it, is in the non-personal service stuff. So this is probably salaries and Social Security, state retirement, health insurance, and so forth for state employees, the people on state payroll. Because remember, most of the local aid is going to just that. Most of the state budget is going to local aid, so it's coming to us. And if you look at, say, Erie County's budget, you'll see personnel services and fringe benefits, and then other operating accounts at the county level. Hope that answers the question. But that's what that basically is.
All right,
And the
thank
other,
you for it.
sure.
Yeah. The other question was about timelines, when the best time of year to request money was something that costs money to be put in the budget. Bree answered in the chat, but I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to share. Is it better to make an ask in January or March, January to March, or from June to September?
Well, it depends on who you want to affect. I think as Bree probably said in the chat, the earlier ones are June and so forth. They're going to be the state agencies and departments, state ed, and then the governor's office, and then January through March is the ledge. And you notice NYLA's moved Advocacy Day up earlier in the year, and yes, it's winter and we have to deal with snow and so forth. But it's much more effective if you get them while they're formulating things and putting things together than waiting till it's too late.
And just to add to that, so yeah, there is a little bit, it depends on who you're trying to influence. So what I will say from this standpoint, or at least from this presentation as we're talking, I would say when we're talking about that June really through December, that's really the time for agencies and for the different internal departments to make their requests. That's also the time that I consider it professional advocacy season. That's when your professional lobbyists or your private firms, myself included in that, that's when we're working with agencies and internal departments to make sure they know and they have our requests and our wish lists. So that's the time that the professional lobbyists are doing that. And then when it comes to that January through March period, that's really when you see grassroots advocates and that swell of ground support come out, because now we're not so much worried about the executive budget. The executive budget is the governor's wish list for lack of a better term. And really it's January through March where that's when we're influencing the legislature itself on their one house proposals. So now we have 3 Christmas lists, and then those final, that February and March period is when we're really making sure that we have our requests known, because that's when all of those important stakeholders are coming to the table and they're advocating on our behalf when we can't get behind those closed doors. So again, I know that's not a perfect squeaky clean answer, but hopefully it does help understanding the timeline a little bit better.
Yeah, and that is really helpful. And it's you really do. You want to frame each phase has a decision point, and who you're trying to reach is going to be different depending on which decision point you're trying to influence. And again, you want to do it, as Bree said, you want to do it before they make that decision. Advocate doing big push for the assembly to put something in after they put out their one house bill. Yeah, probably missed it.
Yeah.
You know?
And so I see a few follow-up questions. So as far as the, wouldn't it be better to influence the governor's budget in the long run? Absolutely, which is why I can only speak for the time since I've been here, but since I've been here, the second floor has received our request in the beginning of October, if not by September, which is why the legislative committee schedule for NILA internally has shifted a bit too. We're deciding on those budget requests and numbers far earlier than was done previously. So now we are, by the time January comes around, quite honestly, the legislature and especially the executive, so the second floor, the governor and the Board of Regents, they've already received our request at least 3 times. So so that's changed a little bit. Again, I can only speak to since I've been here. So yes, we want to influence the governor's budget. Hopefully we see some changes this year. We've been doing lots of groundwork. So yeah, there is a little bit of that helps to get a higher number. And just separately, Michelle, 14 million is not the baseline. That program could be completely eliminated if so choose, or if chosen and desired by the legislature and the governor. I knock on wood and pray to the advocacy gods that will never happen.
Yeah, they decide how much it's going to be for construction aid each and every year, and they can increase it, decrease it. 14 million. Remember, years ago it was a whopping $800,000 for the whole state. Whew. It really didn't take off until it became the 14 million program in, I think, 2006-07. And the fact that libraries successfully use those funds to do really visible and improvements that made a difference helped sustain the 14 million and help grow it, because legislators could see the impact. And let's face it, libraries, we are a bargain because we deliver really good services for not a lot of money in terms of the grand scheme of things for the state. And boy, we seem to have a presence in every legislative district, in some cases multiple outlets in every legislative district, and they pay attention to that too. And so if we time things well and we put through projects that really are supportive, that's what will help sustain that construction aid. But it can change every year.
I would also like to add that I think it really helps to put your library and your staff in the legislator's mind at all times of the year. If you're having an event at the library that's going to benefit your public or your students, invite your local legislators to them, get a photo op. Keep your presence in their minds, because that's going to help a little bit too. If you keep kind of annoying them and reminding them that you're here all year, it makes a difference.
Yeah, it really does. It really does.
Are there any other questions? I haven't seen any more in the chat, but if you have questions, please feel free to keep them coming.
Yep. And if you have questions and you want to reach out to me directly, my email is stonek@buffalolib.org.
Put that in the chat.
Yep. There we go. There you go. So happy to do that. I've been doing it a long time. So, it's in 27. Thank you. So really that's what we have there. I mean, the simplest thing is to time it, and the legislative search function is kind of interesting. The assembly one allows you not only to see what was approved, but who voted for what. And that's kind of handy sometimes. This year, I think the Senate must have done a voice vote to approve the budget, because the assembly listed the votes, but the Senate did not. And the other thing you can search on both the assembly and the generic one from the governor's office is for resolutions, because in the most recent years they have approve things like what we used to call bullet aid in resolution form. And the funny thing this year, when I was trying to find them, I went into the word search, and if you typed grants in aid spaced apart, you could get one house's one version. But the other didn't come up, and so I'm querying the library and a few other key terms. And it turns out that they spelled it grants dash in dash aid. So it didn't come up on the grants and aid search. For those of you in the business profession, you know that that's not the best search engine, but what can you do? You just try different things to see what happens. And lately they've been passing that stuff at the end of session. So it's been June-ish. And Nyla puts it up as soon as pretty quickly after they put it out there.
Thanks, Ken. I'd like to shift things over to Bree, who has a few things to share as well. Bree?
Let me steal the screen. All right, can everybody see that? Perfect. All right, I will be fairly quick because I know how exciting the budget can be, but hopefully this stuff will at least pique your interest for a little bit. What I'm going to do is just go over our recently approved budget requests for 2023. So these are the requests that the NYLA Legislative Committee and the NYLA Council has approved. So this is what you will see on those one-pagers and what we will be discussing for Advocacy Day and beyond. So the first is our state library aid. This is our general aid. So previously, we were advocating for $123.1 million. We had that request for both 21 and 2022. This upcoming session, we are going to be advocating for $147.1 million. So you do see that increase. Without getting too much into the weeds, what I can tell you is this number isn't pulled out of, a hat. This isn't just random. A lot of time and effort and calculations go into this. So without getting too far in the weeds, what I can tell you is that new increase is a reflection not only of our previous ask, but also an increase in operations, the cost for you all to just operate and be, and then also an increase in statutory aid that is owed to the library community. That saw an increase because of the census. So a little bit of calculations there, but you figure our old ask plus an increase in operations plus that increase in statutory aid. So again, we will be looking for $147.1 million. And as Ken reflected in both the Assembly One House and Senate One House, we got pretty darn close to our specific ask. The Senate actually was a darn near replica of our ask. So that demonstrated that they not only understood our request, but they saw the need. So the hope is that we keep seeing that number climb up and crawl up. So next up, we have our library construction aid. So a little bit of background just as a reminder, previously in 21-22, the library community was advocating for $45 million. New in 2023, we will be increasing that to a $69.4 million ask. So again, little bit of calculations or a lot of calculations and considerations. No surprise to any of you, the cost of supplies, demand, and just operating is skyrocketing. So we really tried to take a deeper look into that and projected what our costs could potentially be in the future. So we also needed to consider that there is a $1.52 billion need in New York State. So we have just been scratching the surface by getting that $34 million. So what we did to, again, achieve this number is we looked at the need per system. We subtracted what each was really receiving, and we found that difference. And that difference multiplied by the systems was this total. So we are going to increase our ask. I think we've done a really phenomenal job over the past 2 years at demonstrating the infrastructural needs and changes that our community would benefit from by an increase. So we're going to increase that ask. We're going to change the tone a little bit this year. We're going to do lots of storytelling to make sure our needs are understood. But yeah, those are our two main asks. I'm going to look at the chat really quick. Next session starts in January. Typically, it is the Wednesday after New Year. But yeah, so we don't have a firm date yet. We should actually get the calendar. It'll be released typically around mid-November. So this year it'll be released post elections. There will be some talking points and yeah, rationales behind these, Heidi. Okay, I'm gonna keep going like an auction caller. Next is supplemental budget requests. So these are outside of those two major general funding requests that we ask for. So the first is library materials aid. Those of you who've been with us at least for a year now will remember that in 2022, our community was advocating for an increase in this library materials aid for our school librarians. We did so in conjunction with the Board of Regents. The Board of Regents through the State Education Department had made a request that that aid be increased. They identified the number of $8.30. Not quite sure the rationale about that, but we weren't going to argue. So that's the number that we chose for 2022 on all of our materials. However, new to this year, through discussions, we knew that we wanted this to be a priority. So we took the time to calculate again, did a little bit of formula searching, and we provided our recommendation to the Board of Regents. So all things hoping, the Board of Regents not only includes that library materials aid increase, but chooses to use our dollar amount for that target in their language. So they just had their first meeting around state aid and other priorities just last week. So they'll meet again over the next 2 months to firm those up. But what we are looking for in 2023 is an increase from the current $6.25 per pupil ceiling to increasing to $11 per pupil, again, for that reimbursable aid. I'm gonna take a sip of coffee, hold on. All right, let me look at the chat again. Okay, so moving on, just a few more slides, just things for you all to consider as we move forward and as you attend different advocacy seminars, keywords and things that you might hear. I didn't put on here our bullet aid or those grants and aid, but definitely always have those projects in mind and be talking to your library systems about those. But state considerations, other things. Last year, we did see in the One House proposals a DEI specific funding for libraries. It was about $1.2 million. That's going to be something that I'm speaking about to our library chairs as we go into session to see if that's something that they're interested in. When it comes down to it, if you're asking me, I'm going to ask for $1.5 million to be included in our state library aid versus other grant funding or other specified funding, but I will never turn down grant funding or program funding if it is provided. So that's something to consider. These other two were actually part of the 22 budget, but I want to make you aware of them. So CREST is the Community Resiliency, Economic Sustainability and Technology Program. Really long acronym. It's replacing SAM. So some of you knew what SAM programs or SAM grants were in the past. They're doing away with those. They found it to be too restrictive, and they opened up the guidelines a little bit more to allow people to get a little bit more bang for their buck. So this program was implemented in 2022. It is $385 million. It is a mega pool of money. The guidelines were just released. It is linked out here. I'll make sure I send these to Caitlin, and that way she can have them and you can distribute and see to your heart's content. But those guidelines were just released. Libraries are eligible to get a slice of that pie. So if you have a big capital project or something that you want to work on, that might be a sweet spot for you to get in on. The other is low cap LoCAP is Local Community Assistance Program. That is similar to CREST. It's a little bit smaller of a pool. It is only $185 million only across the state, but eligible purposes for those are things that would support community development, revitalization, economic sustainability, arts and culture, public safety and security. So a little bit different from CREST, or that SAM, what you used to know as SAM. But if your library or system is considered a nonprofit, you would be eligible for those monies. So keep going. I'm almost done, I promise. All right, other things I want to bring up that these are already in the works, but I just want to make sure that you know, federal considerations. We have the Federal Digital Equity Act. That was actually a part of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act way back in November of 2021. There are 3 pools of money. I listed them out here. Really, the only thing you need to know is work is being done on the library's behalf. You don't need to do anything right now. There will come a time that a call for proposals will come out, but Connect All through the state, as well as the National Telecom and Information Administration through federal government, is still working on guidelines for those. But Connect All has submitted grants on behalf of those first 2 programs to start planning. So know that libraries are being considered and that our state librarian is hard at work making sure that we stay top of mind. Just like Caitlin said, make sure we're always top of mind, staying in the legislature and staying in the agency's minds. So those are going to be funds that are separate from the state funding. And then the last but not least, I have our Build America Library Act. That is, again, federal government. These were all a part of federal appropriation bills, but I want to mention them because if passed, this particular bill and appropriation bills would provide $20 million in new funding to improve public and tribal library facilities. On top of that, there are $3.6 million in other grants that would be for LSTA and $3 million through IMLS. And that's in addition to what we normally see. So lots of pools of money, which you would think then, heck, why aren't we doing better? Why aren't we getting more? But there are competing interests in each of these different pools or each of these different acts. There are competing interests and there's lots of hands looking for a slice of that budget pie. So this all goes back to making sure that our talking points are locked in, making sure that we're constantly speaking to our legislators, their staff, and doing the best we can to stay top of mind so that they see and reflect our needs in the final appropriation bills. And then I'll stop sharing my screen. And I did that real fast, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Bri. We still have people on, so maybe someone's got a few questions. We'll just give it a minute. I want to say thank you to both Ken and Bri for great information today, great presentation. I hope everyone learned from this. Thank you all for attending and spending your lunch hour with us. Stay tuned for more from Nyla in terms of the budget. Hopefully there'll be a positive outcome this year. Well, looking forward to that. It doesn't look like there are any questions. I did drop a evaluation link in the chat. If you haven't taken that and filled it out, please do so. I will have a recording available for you as soon as I possibly can. And I think that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful, Bri. That was great.